because of the genocide that's going on in Gaza. Am I an anti-Semite if I disagree with Netanyahu's policy in Gaza of exterminating the people? Am I an anti-Semite if I criticize the IDF because they just fired 2 tank shells into Holy Family Church in Gaza? This is precisely the bind that the bishops are in right now.
Yeah.
They're in a bind because they've allowed this Catholic-Jewish dialogue to basically they painted themselves into a corner. How are you going to get out of this? When neoconservatism was getting us into a war, I had to say the word Jew. I had to talk about that. And that's touching the third rail. So if you're going to tell the truth, you're going to offend somebody. But that's it. So what are you going to do? What's the option? Go for the money? Even Charlie wouldn't go for the money. That's the option. Can't serve God and mammon.
So you have been accused of anti-Semitism. Do you make a distinction, as you speak about the Jews, between those who have had a immensely negative influence versus people like Norman Finkelstein, Noam Chomsky, John Mersheimer, who have written about some of these matters, at least from a political perspective or a military perspective?
The main distinction we have to make is between the Jews and all Jews. People assume when you say the Jews that you mean all Jews. This is not biblical. Yeah.
Mm.
If we go to what happens, October 7th happens, he tweets, "Give them hell." Well, how do you feel now? They got hell, and you told them to do it. How do you feel now? And so lately, before, Troy, I think he has another drug problem or something. He's just withdrawn. And I think it was the pressure of his conscience. All those little Palestinian children who rise up and point their finger at you and say, you told them to give us hell. And I died. I died under a building that they bombed. And so, but by the end, every time he'd go on, he'd burst into tears. And then he finally decided he couldn't go on.
In one Q&A session, somebody asked you, who is the intellectual heir to Charlie Kirk? And interestingly, you said Nick Fuentes. Why is that? All right, welcome everyone. I am joined today by a very special guest, Dr. E. Michael Jones, prolific author whose subjects vary widely from history to theology to politics, and somebody who is not afraid to tackle the taboo topics, a writer who has been canceled, who has expressed deep courage in the midst of professional persecution, someone who has given a lot to the church and also has known what it means to suffer, to embrace the cross. Dr. Jones, it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you, Father. Good to be here. Good, yeah. Glad you're here with us.
Oh, thanks so much. Let me begin with a current event. You were one of the first individuals who, days after the murder of Charlie Kirk, recognized a potential connection to Charlie's Jewish donors, to Israel, potentially to Netanyahu, a bigger plot. Say more about that.
Yeah, so we were shocked by his death, and I decided to do a podcast on it. Let's go back to my connection with Charlie Kirk. I had a former employee went to one of the Turning Point operations. This must have been around 2019. At this point, Charlie is totally within the mindset of the Republican Party. And at this point, the Republican Party is promoting homosexuality. So he's got this black guy on, black homosexual, and my employee says, how is promoting sodomy going to help us win the culture wars? Well, the black guy immediately got upset and he took over. But the important thing was watching Charlie. Charlie was like a deer in the headlights. He had just stepped into something that he didn't understand and he didn't know what to say at this point. And it never changed. And I'm saying that let's take that as the baseline where we begin. At this point, he had a choice. Am I going to go with the Republican donor narrative, largely Jewish donor narrative? Or am I going to talk to the people I'm supposed to represent? Well, what he did over this time is go to campus after campus and started talking to these people. And he started to understand what their concerns were. And acceptance of homosexuality was not one of their concerns. They're in debt. Everybody's in college is struggling with student debt. They can't get married. They can't talk to girls. They're addicted to pornography. All of these things are their concerns. And he started to change over this period of time. That's what happened to Charlie. I just wrote a book on American identity and used that famous statement from Aquinas' treatise on being. Existence is now the important thing. This is after the creation, after they understood that the world was created, which Plato and Aristotle did not know. And existence calls forth a new essence. And that's what happened to American identity after the Calvinists arrived in Massachusetts and headed west. And that's what happened to Charlie Kirk. Over this period of time, he got married, he had 2 children, and suddenly he can contextualize the whole homosexual thing according to his own experience. It doesn't fit. So what fits? And now he's getting more and more, what should I say, open to who's influencing the culture. And these are some of his biggest donors. The Jews are his biggest donors. We just saw today new materials coming in every day. Bill Ackman called him in, big Jewish donor, called him to his place in the Hamptons, said, you're getting off the reservation, stay on target here. The Shillman Foundation, they dropped him. And every time they drop you, there's a threat. And so at this point, Netanyahu shows up and says, I'll give you $150 million. But you're not going to get $150 million from Bibi unless there's strings attached. And the strings is basically you got to go back to the reservation. And he says, no. I said, that's a nail in his coffin. And what we're saying here, so during this period of time, he's upset with the genocide in Gaza. Everyone's upset about that. It's having an effect on his understanding. These people are leaning on him. He criticizes the ADL. No, you're not getting Jewish money to criticize the ADL. Criticizes Netanyahu, criticizes Israel, and then suddenly he's dead. Now, this is the circumstantial evidence, but it's overwhelming. And then the latest thing is the funeral, and Tucker Carlson comes on and says, 2,000 years ago, these hummus eaters killed Jesus because he was telling the truth. And then he talks about Charlie Kirk. So I tweeted, said, look, let's say what this is in plain language. The Jews killed Christ 2,000 years ago because he told the truth, and they did the same thing to Charlie last week for the same reason. It's gotten huge. I mean, it's on X. I'm not being banned. A lot of comments, most of them positive. So I think this is where we stand right now. At the same time, we've had all of this information flowing in of people who actually photographed the thing with their cell phones. You can't do anything now without 50 people photographing it with your cell phones. This completely undermines the FBI's authority when they investigate it. So they come out with this thing of guy, 200 meters away, a tranny, 1 bullet, blah, blah, blah. And now it turns out that Kash Patel has withdrawn, is reopening the case because they couldn't do it this time. This is not 1963 anymore. This is not the Kennedy assassination. This is not a nation that waits for Walter Cronkite to tell them the God's honest truth. We're way beyond that now. And now we've got this crisis of authority because Kash Patel backed down in light of all this evidence on the internet. You can't deny it. The way the body moves, all of this type of stuff. I'm not saying we have a definitive solution here, but in a sense that's irrelevant because this is the details, the technical details. The overwhelming case is made by asking the question, cui bono? Who benefited from this? And I think that's clear. That's absolutely clear.
One of the aspects that I find interesting, and I haven't seen anybody emphasize it yet, was the fact that Charlie was killed on the verge of September 11th. on the eve of the 25th anniversary. And I noticed that Tucker, who you mentioned, was about to come out with a documentary miniseries on September 11th. He mentioned on Pierce that in that documentary, he would be featuring those 5 dancing Israelis who perhaps had foreknowledge of 9/11, who were celebrating it. Also a connection to supposed Israeli art students who were known to be Israeli nationals trying to infiltrate governmental buildings. And what about that connection, Dr. Jones? Have you thought about that?
Well, we're talking about one more false flag operation here, one more big event that was where the official narrative doesn't make any sense. It's not coherent. Yeah. So Tucker Carlson is ready to blow the whistle on this. By the way, one of the conditions, probably the main condition for staying in the graces of the big Jewish donors, was not to talk to Tucker Carlson. Mm-hmm. And he was, Charlie not only refused to accept that condition, but he scheduled him to speak at his December event. So you add this up, and it's pretty clear. He offended a number of powerful people. Again, what did these people do the day before Charlie was killed? They murdered a team of Palestinian negotiators in Doha and bragged about it. They have a history of targeted assassinations. You go back and back and back. Soleimani, you can go back. All of the Iranian nuclear scientists, how they brag about that, brag about how clever they are. And then at the same time, right after Doha, Netanyahu announces, we will go anywhere and kill anyone. No place is safe anymore. American ally. We don't care if they're an American ally. Well, why should we not apply this to Charlie Kirk? It seems to me that we're at this crucial moment right now. The FBI story has collapsed. There's a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. They've had their speech. Erica has given the eulogy for her husband. Which way are they going to go? Which way are they going to go now? Are you going to go? Ben Shapiro has now announced he's ready to pick up the bloody microphone. Do you think that would fly? I don't think that would fly. I don't think that would fly at all. I think the first time that Ben Shapiro got in front of a Turning Point audience, someone would point the finger at them and said, the Jews killed Charlie Kirk. Mm. And what's he going to say then? No, that's a conspiracy theory. Well, you can say that. But convincing people is another thing, especially in light of all of this evidence, all the evidence, all the circumstantial evidence surrounding his death.
Yeah. Speaking of circumstantial evidence, before Charlie Kirk, a major news story were the Epstein files. And I think a lot of people, especially his supporters, lost respect for Donald Trump. And personally, I began to think that Trump is being politically castrated by Netanyahu. And the question of Epstein as potentially being connected to Mossad or Israeli intelligence and running a blackmailing ring against American politicians in terms of even considering why the Zionist lobby is so influential. Your thoughts on that?
Well, again, let's be sophisticated and look at the historical background. What do you think Monica Lewinsky was? We know all about that. Everybody knows about that. That was a Mossad blackmailing operation, against Bill Clinton. Let's go all the way back to Georg Ratzinger, Pope Benedict's great uncle, wrote a book called Jüdisches Erwerbsleben under a pseudonym, and it talked about the system. Let's say in cities like Paris at the turn of the 20th century, where you bring aristocrats in who have a lot of land and don't have a lot of cash, but they got a little cash, and this guy, the pimp, the Jewish pimp, all pimps were Jewish at this point. This is before blaxploitation films. The pimps were Jewish. Bring them in. We're going to show you a good time. We're going to show you some prostitutes. You're going to waste your money on the prostitutes, but that's not a problem because we can lend you money after you piss it all away on prostitutes. This was an established way of dealing with people that the Jews had perfected. And you're telling me that suddenly they forgot about that? This is the way. Again, what's the circumstantial evidence? What's the history? What's the background? That's what we're talking about here. Blackmail played a huge part in American history. Kinsey was a blackmailer. Alfred Kinsey. In order to talk to Kinsey, you had to tell him your sexual history. But I'll never tell anybody. I'm honest. I'll never. How do you know he's not going to tell anybody? And then Kinsey gets in trouble because he got all this illegal activity. And then a bigger blackmail comes along, and that's J. Edgar Hoover. And that's the FBI who stayed in power. They had to carry him out of office because he had dirt on every single member of Congress. And then the bigger blackmailer comes in, which is the ADL, which has pictures of J. Edgar in his pink nightie. So you see this whole thing, basically hidden history is nothing but blackmail. And we're supposed to believe that Epstein, did not do this? Hugh Hefner, another guy. He was the only goy at the Playboy operation. It was all Jews. He had a Playboy mansion. In the Playboy mansion, every single room had a camera. And somebody confronted him. I said, I just thought it would be interesting, as if he's some type of voyeur, as if he has to pay. No, it was blackmail. He broke the law consistently, was never hauled in for anything because he had the goods on these people.
One of the topics, Dr. Jones, that you've written about, I first noticed a major book that came out during the Iraq War when I was a college student. It was called Neocons. And you have essays in there from people like Noam Chomsky, Robert Fisk, and the Catholic, E. Michael Jones. And I noticed that neoconservatism is a topic that continues in your book on the revolutionary Jewish spirits.
Right.
When I was a college student, I remember that for me, conservatism wasn't appealing because conservatism was connected with neocons. George W. Bush, the war in Iraq, his surrounding, cabinet and intellectual influences. And there was hope in Trump moving the Republican Party towards more of a paleoconservatism, although this Trump 2.0 administration, I'm getting very, hesitant about. But how would you explain, for those who may not know, what is neoconservatism and how it's influenced our culture?
Yeah, it's a Jewish political movement. The term was created by Irving Kristol, who was a Trotskyite in the 1930s at Alcove B at the City College of New York. Alcove A, this is the cafeteria. They were Stalinists. Alcove B were the Trotskyites, and that was Irving Kristol. Then he got caught up in the Cold War. He became an asset for the CIA when he started, and he became the editor of Encounter magazine, which was a CIA front operation. And basically, they started to move in on the right. Jews were always left wing. They've always been left wing. And so suddenly there was an opportunity when Reagan Thatcher came to power. The lady who wrote about it is Midge Decter. She wrote a book. She's the wife of Norman Podhoretz, who was the editor of Commentary, which was the main vehicle for neoconservatism at this point. And she said that they had a meeting with Reagan, and she was shocked. The Republicans want the Jews to join the party because they wanted the money. And this was the era of leveraged buyouts. The Jews made big contributions. The junk bond guys made big contributions. They were allowed free rein to destroy American industry by buying it up with junk bonds, loading it down with debt, and so on and so forth. That's where it came from. It was basically the split came when communism fell. Every successful revolution leads to a civil war. It happened in Russia, it happened with conservatism. And as soon as they're victorious, there's a split between the neocons, who are the Jews from New York City, and the paleoconservatives, who are the remnant of America First from Rockford, Midwest. Go back to the original idea. It was America First. This was the nationalist movement that tried to keep America out of the war. It was headquartered in Detroit. Father Coughlin, Henry Ford, and Charles Lindbergh, all of whom have been demonized as anti-Semites primarily because of Lindbergh's speech when he said there are three groups that want to get us in the war. It's Great Britain, the Roosevelt administration, and the Jews. And as soon as he said that, he became worthy of hate, the great hate. So it split, and the paleo-conservatives then promoted Pat Buchanan. Mm-hmm. And that was in 1992. He defeated George Bush, the standing president, in the primary in New Hampshire. And it didn't go much after that. But that was where that came from. That's when I became involved. I became involved with them. I thought this is the real American conservatism. I was going to Rockford Institute. I used to speak there. I liked Tom Fleming. I always admired his erudition. And then I am thinking, a group of people now, we won the Cold War, and now we're heading with the war in Iraq. I don't know why we're doing this, but it's pretty clear that the Jews, the neocons, are behind it. And so I started thinking maybe we should write about this. And that led to my book, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. Mm-hmm. The research began in 2003, the year of the Iraq War. So, so Sam Francis, another paleocon, former conservative, the Washington Times, was career destroyed by William F. Buckley, who was a commissar who worked for the Jews to keep everybody on the reservation. He died. They asked me to give a speech at his memorial. He also became a Catholic right before he died. And I announced the thesis of the Jewish Revolutionary Spirit at that conference. And I blew up the conference. I blew up paleoconservatism. People run screaming from the room. Taki's there. We're all going to be arrested. And in retrospect, I think that this was the moment. We talked before about the Polish bishops getting on board when I did Libido Dominandi book tour in Poland. This was the moment for the paleocon movement. They had to say the word Jew. They had to be able to say that. They were already using the word neocon. It's the first time I ever heard the word neocon was out of Tom Fleming's mouth. David Brooks gave the etymology. Neo means new and con means Jew. So it was a standing joke among the neocons themselves, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. And so the train known as the Zeitgeist left the station, and Tom Fleming was left standing on the platform. That was the moment. We'll never know, but now I don't have to. I'm not a lonely guy anymore. The world has come around to see the issue, the fundamental issue facing both the church, Catholic Church, and the world right now is the Jewish question. And the whole point of my book was to separate the Jewish question from the race question. It's not a racial issue. I'm going back to Catholic theology, back to the idea of the Logos. What is Jewish identity? It's rebellion against the Logos, manifested by their murder of the Logos incarnate. That's what set Jewish identity. That's what we're facing right now. I provided the categories that would allow people to speak it. And finally, that's what we're coming around to. Tucker Carlson had to address this, even in his kind of veiled way. He had to address the issue everyone's facing right now, which is, I think the Jews killed Charlie Kirk. This is spreading now. And that's the issue.
And it's so difficult, in a culture where you say it, and of course, instantaneously you'll be accused of anti-Semitism. Right? We can't even have a normal conversation. Praise God that we're doing it today. But when I was a college student, I went to DePaul University. One of my professors was Norman Finkelstein, great political scientist. And of course, he lost his job at DePaul. There was a great lobbying effort against him because of his criticisms of Israel and support for the Palestinians. But let me ask you in that regard, Dr. Jones, since obviously you have been accused of anti-Semitism, do you make a distinction as you speak about the Jews between those who have had a immensely negative influence versus people like Norman Finkelstein, Noam Chomsky, John Mersheimer, who have written about some of these matters, at least from a political perspective or a military perspective.
The main distinction we have to make is between the Jews and all Jews. People assume when you say the Jews that you mean all Jews. This is not biblical. If we go to 1 Thessalonians 2, St. Paul says, the Jews are the people that killed Christ, and they are enemies of the entire human race. So that's the Jews. The people is a political entity that does not encompass all Jews. The Blessed Mother did not shout, crucify him.
Right.
The beloved disciple did not shout, crucify him. There were plenty of Jews there, all had the same DNA. There were plenty of Jews, scared Jews, hiding out in the upper room, just, who were who accepted Jesus Christ as the Messiah. So the Jews is a political entity that was ruled by the Sanhedrin at that point, and now it's major Jewish organizations at this point. But that they maintain this coherence, and the main coherence, the unifying factor throughout history is rejection of Logos. Rejection of the Logos incarnate when you kill him, and then rejection of the Logos, which is the order of the universe. And you become, when you reject the order of the universe, you become a revolutionary. And that's why I wrote the Jewish revolutionary spirit, to trace that from then to now. So it's not all Jews. Okay, there are plenty of Jews who are honest about what's going on. There are some Jews that have read my book and converted, gotten baptized.
Wow.
I just had an experience. I'm an Israeli lady who just got baptized. Wow. Because this happens all the time. It's happening right now, especially now because Jewish identity has become so odious to the entire world, but especially to the Jews themselves. Do I have to accept responsibility for the genocide in Gaza because my mother's Jewish? This is the crisis that these people are facing right now. It's repugnant to anyone who has a conscience. Every man has a conscience. And it's overwritten by the software known as Zionism, especially the Old Testament interpretation of Gideon and Amalek. But the Jews are facing a crisis right now, because they have a conscience, and they are implicitly being drawn into this genocide in Gaza because that's their identity.
Yeah, and I think that's a fantastic distinction, the Jews versus all Jews. I mean, I think that mitigates substantially the anti-Semitism accusations, because I think that what a lot of people are concerned about is if you just make it a collective responsibility of all Jews that are in existence, and obviously that's not what you're doing. And you touched on an interesting point, because one of the things, given all that's happening, that, to be honest, I struggle with, I have strong feeling towards, is this movement of Christian Zionism, right? Even when we look at some of the major texts of the Jewish tradition, the Talmud most prominently, one of the most disrespectful anti-Christian perceptions of Christ, as if he's burning in hell among excrements, and then a ridiculously disgusting perception of the Blessed Virgin Mary as being unfaithful with a Roman soldier, Christ being an illegitimate child. And then you have so many of these videos online, Christians in the Holy Land literally being spat on by Jews, Jewish groups spitting on them as they're processing. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is America's great ally.
Yeah, are these our friends?
What's going on? Yeah,
are these our elder brothers?
Right.
Well, I think it goes back. I deal with this in my latest book, the Walking with the Bible Gun, The Rise, Fall, and Return of American Identity. You can't underestimate the effect of bad theology on the creation of the United States of America. And I'm talking about one article in particular, Paradise Lost by John Milton. Satan's speech at the beginning of Paradise Lost, how this influenced basically the entire generation of founding fathers. Thomas Jefferson was reading it. Tom Paine quoted it in Common Sense. Ben Franklin's reading it. John Adams is reading it. And the other side, William Fletcher, is criticizing them. This is satanic. That's not exaggeration. We're talking about Satan. Here we shall be free. Well, they thought, and he was talking about hell, and they're talking about America. When they came over to America, the Puritans they're the Puritans. John Milton was a Puritan. They killed the king. And so we get to the heart of the matter, I think, and it's sola scriptura. So I had we had an hour-long discussion with this black couple. They were offended when I said this. I shouldn't have said it on Candace, but I said, the hidden grammar of Protestantism is Satanism. I shouldn't have said that because I have to mention Paradise Lost and the Puritans. That is the hidden grammar of Paradise Lost. Better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. That's turning the world upside down, And it had a huge influence on American identity.
Yeah.
So let's get to the heart of the matter. What did Cromwell do? You give an Englishman a Bible, he's going to immediately turn to the Old Testament. He's going to immediately turn to the whole story of Exodus and then the occupation of Canaan, and he's going to say, I'm Gideon. Netanyahu did this. Cromwell did it. And if he's Gideon, who's Amalek? Well, anybody you don't like. So for Cromwell, it was the Catholics thinking they had sanctuary in the basement of that church in Drogheda in Ireland before he went in and slaughtered them all. The first man to do that in 900 years, to violate the sanctuary of the Catholic Church, because he had read the Bible and he knew that he was Gideon. Benjamin quoted the same text, and now he's using it to justify the genocide in Gaza. You can't underestimate the effect of this bad theology to this day, and that's the heart of Christian Zionism. I mean, this guy Huckabee, what are you talking about? The Jews, it's this idea, wait a minute, you didn't get the memo here. When the temple was destroyed, the Catholic Church became the new Israel. We are the new Israel. So when Peter goes to Jerusalem after the Pentecost, he says, you killed Christ. Another guy who said it. And it says they were cut to the heart. And they said, what must we do to be saved? And he says, you have to be baptized. So you can be saved if you're a Jew, but you have to be baptized. You have no special Jewish privilege anymore. You're just like the rest of us. You have to be baptized because baptism is necessary for salvation. All of this is completely contradicted by the Christian Zionism and the crazy Schofield Bible notes and all of the theology that went with it.
Yeah, Schofield Bible, the fact that this is a 19th century heresy, but when you read the ancient church fathers, whether it's St. Augustine, Justin Martyr, it is that covenantal theology of fulfillment, what sometimes is referred to as supersessionism, that Christianity is the fulfillment. The chosen people today, it is the church, as you're saying, it is the church of Christ. And most Christians, or maybe even Catholics who do support Zionism, I don't think they have any idea that Theodor Herzl met with the Pope, right? He met with
Pius X.
And what happened in that meeting?
Yeah, well, they said, we want you to bless Israel. He said, sorry, I'm not going to do that because you have been displaced. We are the new Jerusalem. But if you want missionaries, we'll send missionaries to convert you.
That's right.
So that was nice of him,
Yeah.
But he said it. So what is the Catholic equivalent of Christian Zionism? It's dual covenant theology. This has been the bitter fruit of Catholic Jewish dialogue, where they've been nibbling away at this for 60 years now, ever since the end of Vatican II, and come closer and closer. And the more, look, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. When Cardinal Bernardine got caught up in this homosexual scandal, he ran to the Jews and he went to Jerusalem, immediately goes to Jerusalem and says that the church was always one of the bastions of anti-Semitism, basically threw Holy Mother Church under the bus so he'd get favorable press with the Jews because he was being blackmailed. This is despicable. But it's been the sad story of Catholic Jewish dialogue for 60 years now. And basically they've given away the store, the church. We were involved in this. Bob Sungenis wrote an article in Culture Wars, the magazine I edit, in which he said there was heresy in the Catholic Catechism, the Bishop's Catechism, when it said the Mosaic covenant is eternally valid. That's not true. That is false. And we brought it up, and suddenly, they took it out. And then asked in a press conference, no, it had nothing to do with the article in Culture Wars. But before that happened, he wanted a meeting with Bishop Rhodes, who's now the bishop here. And instead, Father Massa shows up, and he said, nobody believes in supersessionism anymore. So that means dual covenant. So that means you can get to heaven without baptism. So your way is that you worship Jesus Christ as God and get baptized, and that's the way you get to heaven, but they can get to heaven by crucifying Christ. Does this make any sense? No, absolutely not.
Nostratate, written by a German Jesuit, Cardinal Augustin Bea. How much of this ecumenical compromising do you think is a result of the sensitivity towards memory of the Holocaust?
Yes, absolutely. That was the stage. You're absolutely right. That was the stage. Jules Isaac had gone to Cardinal Bea and started talking about the teaching of contempt, which is basically every single church father, St. John Chrysostom, St. Augustine, all said that the Jews killed Christ, and so on and so forth. Said that was a teaching of contempt. Cardinal Bea then says, okay, we'll see what we can do. This is the beginning of the council. He refers it to his assistant, Malachi Martin. Malachi Martin, an ambitious Jesuit, became a double agent. This is all documented in my book, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, this section of Vatican II. So he's working for B'nai B'rith and the American Jewish Committee. They were paying him through publishing houses. So he'd write a book and he'd get outrageous royalties, advances up front. That's what they were paying him. And his job was to basically get the church to deny that the Jews killed Christ. That was the job. That was your job. Well, you can't get 2,000 bishops together. I'm sorry. It's not going to work. You're not going to get 2,000 bishops together and say, no, the Jews didn't kill. Well, who killed them then? The Samoans? Who killed them? And so he failed, absolutely failed. And I have all the documentation of all the commiseration that took place after the failure of their attempt. It's not in Nostratate. But what is there? The church opposes all forms of anti-Semitism. Okay, what's anti-Semitism? They never defined the term. And so maybe I haven't done enough. I haven't done enough research to find out exactly how that phrase got in there. But it's one of those things that could be like a time bomb that will go off after it's approved. And that's precisely what happened. What does it mean? The church, would you define anti-Semitism? I'll give you, I know what they meant. The bishops at that time, if you ask them, they say, yeah, it's biological determinism. It has no place in the Catholic Church. Okay? But what does it mean now? It means anything Jews don't like. Just ask the ADL. Okay? So we're going to cut to the chase here. Question that has to be answered. Is it a sin to criticize Jews? Let's clear the air. We need to clarify this situation. We can't use the term anti-Semitism because it's completely meaningless. It just means what Jews don't like. Question to the bishop. Is it a sin to criticize Jews?
No, of course not.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. Case closed. All right?
Yeah. We're in South Bend right now, and I'm thinking about Amy Coney Barrett, for example, when she came before the Judicial Committee for her nomination. One of the senators emphasized, Judge Barrett, you criticized this person. And she specified, Senator, I don't criticize people, I criticize their actions. And of course, if anybody acts in a way that is not in line with God's law, if there's human rights violations, if there's political exploitation, one's identity should not protect them from criticism, or else you're playing a very unhealthy game of identity politics.
Right. And history has caught up with this document and made it absolutely necessary that we clarify this issue because of the genocide that's going on in Gaza. Mm-hmm. Am I an anti-Semite if I disagree with Netanyahu's policy in Gaza of exterminating the people? Am I an anti-Semite if I criticize the IDF because they just fired 2 tank shells into Holy Family Church in Gaza? This is precisely the bind that the bishops are in right now.
Yeah.
They're in a bind because they've allowed this Catholic-Jewish dialogue to basically paint them. They painted themselves into a corner. How are you going to get out of this? I'm saying it's not going. We're at the end of the Third Republic. It's not going to pass into the Fourth Republic. The Holocaust narrative is going down the drain, and the church's endorsement of it is going to have to be thrown overboard. Okay, we have it was weaponized when Bishop Williamson, remember that, the Williamson affair? And they did exactly, the Lombardi, the worst press secretary in the history of the Catholic Church, immediately jumps in and starts apologizing. Wait a minute. The church cannot pronounce infallibly on the number of people who died in World War II. That is not within the charism of the Catholic Church, infallibility. They handled it badly. We have to be able to deal with this. We have to have a clear answer from the bishops, clearing us of this charge, because now it's used as a weapon against Catholics, by Catholics, against Catholics. So I'll give you the classic example would be the man goes to his pastor and says, Father, I think we should have E. Michael Jones come here. What's that pastor going to do? He's going to go to his computer. He's going to go to Google. He's going to type in E. Michael Jones on Google. And the first thing that will come up will be the ADL's character assassination. And so the Jews now have power to determine who is a Catholic in good standing. This is intolerable. Got to stop.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a friend who said to me that sometimes he goes on that ADL list to actually look up the intellectuals that he wants to follow.
Yeah.
Because they have the inverse effect.
So the last speech I gave in Poland was in Torun. So I give my little speech, and then the guy stands up and he says, I hear you're an anti-Semite. Everybody goes, and then he says, that must mean you have something important to say. And then everybody laughed.
Yeah. And it's similar to what Candace said to you during that interview. The way that anti-Semitism has been misused and abused, it's very similar to the way that the word race or racism has been misused and abused for years now, where a lot of it is beginning to lose its substance. And there's statistics that say that Gen Z, especially people under 30, just do not support what Israel is doing at all. There's a new awakening.
That's exactly what Charlie Kirk found out, because that was his demographic.
Yeah.
And he's talking to those people, and they're saying basically, you don't have any credibility unless you're willing to talk about the Jewish question. He was faced with that, and that was the choice, and he chose his constituents, and I think that's what got him killed.
And speaking of Charlie Kirk, perhaps we can finish this interview coming to full circle where we began with him. In one Q&A session, somebody asked you who is the intellectual heir to Charlie Kirk. And interestingly, you said Nick Fuentes. Why is that?
I don't think it was I think it was, the question was more like, who's going to fill the vacuum? Because I don't think Nick is his intellectual heir. I don't think he followed him, but there's a vacuum now. The vacuum is known as conservatism. Conservatism died with Charlie Kirk. I think that was the end of it. Nick had attacked Charlie. What I'm saying here is when the vacuum, the center was deliberately obliterated in a way very similar to what happened during World War II in Germany, where the center was obliterated because they wanted Hitler to come to power because he was the most radical leader and was most likely to lead Germany into a war. I think that's exactly the position with Nick Fuentes. He's the most radical, most extreme leader of that group. They're fighting over the same demographic. That's clear. They're fighting over that 20-year-old demographic. And Charlie was doing it from a point of view of media, establishment conservatism. Nick has attacked it, but what did he do after Charlie Kirk died? He attacks Candace Owens, and he says, anybody who thinks that Israel is involved is a conspiracy nut, or something along those lines. No, I think you're You showed your hand there when you did that. Maybe you're afraid that you're the next guy. Someone did show up at his place, apparently was ready to kill him. So maybe he's afraid of that. But that's not, I don't think, you're not being honest there. I'm going to be perfectly frank. I don't think you're being honest there. I think you capitulated to the pressure. Maybe you want to step into his shoes. I don't think that's going to happen. But I think, as I understood the question, who is going to benefit the most from his death? I think that would be Nick Fuentes.
Interesting. Dr. Jones, fascinating conversation. Thank you for your work. Thank you for bringing a lot of things to the light. Actually, if I may ask this as a final question, you are someone who obviously has dedicated his intellectual life to speaking about taboo topics that other people steer away from completely. And it is an act of exposing evil. In that sense, I believe that there is sanctity in the act. May I ask, what are some of the sacrifices, maybe professional or personal, that you've had to face because of this decision? And also, where does your conviction come from, your freedom of spirit, your courage to work this way?
The freedom of the gospel. It's because I think I have a strong Catholic identity. If you don't know who you are and you can't identify the enemy, you will lose every battle. So I think that what I forged over this period of time, I'm thinking about this. I'm writing my autobiography now. I'm old enough, I think, to write it. And I'm thinking about my life as basically trying to figure out what's going on. That's the first thing we got to do. Like I was born 4 months after the Kinsey report got issued. My life was affected. In many ways, my life was determined by the Kinsey report. The whole idea of sexual revolution, the whole idea of the undermining of sexual morals, I saw it in one instance after another throughout my life. That's part of it. So it's also in the gospel, you know. I mean, Jesus tells the apostles, unless you eat my body and drink my blood, you're not going to have eternal life. And a lot of people leave. And then he turns to Peter and says, well, you leaving too? And then he says, to whom should we go? So if you're going to do this, you're invariably going to offend someone. And the whole point of starting a magazine is you don't want to offend your own people. You want to have a kind of niche. The question is, who determines your market? Who determines it? And, you know, so back then we started, it was right, the Reagan era, John Paul II, they were in alignment because they were both fighting communism. And so it was easy to do that. And suddenly that falls apart. And then you realize, no, it's not on 1984 anymore. And so you have to deal with what I've already mentioned, you know, when neoconservatism was getting us into a war, I had to say the word Jew. I had to talk about that. And that's, you know, that's touching the third rail. So if you're going to tell the truth, you're going to offend somebody. But that's it. So what are you going to do? What's the option? Go for the money? Even Charlie wouldn't go for the money. You know, that's the option. Can't serve God and mammon. So it's one or the other. Cardinal Ratzinger, the first time I met him was at St. Charles Borromeo Seminary in Philadelphia, and he gave a speech, and the gist of the speech was, are you willing to suffer for the truth? So yes, I'm ready. And then you find out what it means by telling the truth. We got exactly back to what Tucker Carlson said. The Jews killed Christ because he told the truth. And implying that Charlie was killed for the same reason. If you want to tell the truth, you better prepare yourself for struggle. But then again, you think at that point, what's the option? Go for the money? I'll give you, I hope I'm not being uncharitable with this guy, but I'll give you a guy who I think went for the money, and that's Jordan Peterson. He got a big deal. I didn't look in his bank account, but a lot of money from the Daily Wire. And And around that time it's happening, there's a picture that Ben Shapiro posts of there's Jordan Peterson reaching across the table, shaking hands with Benjamin Netanyahu, with Ben Shapiro grinning from ear to ear. And then when what happens? October 7th happens. He tweets, "Give him hell." Well, how do you feel now? They got hell, and you told them to do it. How do you feel now? And so lately, before, Troy, I think he has another drug problem or something. He's just withdrawn. And I think it was the pressure of his conscience. All those little Palestinian children who rise up and point their finger at you and say, you told them to give us hell. And I died. I died under a building that they bombed. And so, but by the end, every time he'd go on, he'd burst into tears. And then he finally decided he couldn't go on. So I think that's a cautionary tale for people who are ready to go for the money.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting inversion when you see the story of Candace, right? Because she got fired from the Daily Wire because she decided to speak up. She proclaims that Christ is king. I remember the Daily Wire had a whole video sponsored by a number of Jewish intellectuals criticizing the statements. But Candace, of course, if you look at her numbers, she's currently over 5 million subscribers, about 200,000 people on the live stream. And people see a voice who had the courage to transcend the money, transcend the pressure, and say the Palestinian child has dignity. And I noticed that there are a number of people, you mentioned Peterson, I would say Peterson, Ben Shapiro, PBD, a number of people who just lost a lot of credibility, a lot of subscribers. I personally, who used to follow some of these guys have unsubscribed, have lost respect, and it does become the taboo topic. Are you willing to take a stance here when genocide literally is transpiring in front of the world, or are you going to turn a blind eye and lose
exactly
self-respect?
That's exactly the deal with the devil that Charlie turned down. I'll give you $150 million if you turn a blind eye to the genocide. And he turned it down. God bless him.
Yeah. Dr. Jones, thank you for being somebody who has been a light in this debate, who has had a strong voice, who has not made those compromises, but has had the chutzpah, the courage to speak, to call evil for what it is. Thank you for your work, and thanks for your deep faith. It's an honor for a priest, for myself to interview, to meet you. I know that you've suffered a lot for your work, and I just think it's a tremendous example of having virtue over selling out.
Thank you. And thank you for coming. And it's especially gratifying because you're a priest. Because I'm going to tell you honestly, I've often felt abandoned by the Catholic Church. And so it's an honor to have you here. And I'm glad you're here. Thank you for interviewing me.
Oh, absolutely. Maybe we'll do a part 2 one day.
Sure.
God bless, Dr. Jones.
Thanks,
Thank you
Father.
so much.